This comment right here is what the average economically illiterate person believes in, and it has so many inconsistencies and fallacies that I had to take a moment to address this comment and make a video about this. So let me break this down one by one. At first, monopolies and consolidation of power in a few massive corporations is the natural end goal of capitalism. It's not. In a capitalist free market, if a company starts to get bigger and more profitable, it attracts newer competitors into that market. Even if that company is big enough to buy out these little smaller companies, it doesn't stop new competitors from entering the market. The only thing that stops new competitors from entering into that market is through government regulations. This is why most government regulations actually ends up creating the very monopolies that they claim to eliminate. Monopolies are almost always created by government regulations because those regulations creates a legal barrier for entry for newer players to enter the market and compete with those established players. Take healthcare, for example. There are a lot of these big pharmaceutical companies that has special privileges granted by the government, the FDA, that allows them to sell drugs at a higher price. Why aren't new competitors able to enter the market and compete them on that price and lower the cost for the consumer? Because the government has created these legal barriers that prohibits newer players from entering and selling these drugs without government approval or these FDA guidelines. Next, he said, while I understand the initial concern that businesses will adjust their prices accordingly with minimum wage increases, he has a larger plan that mitigates that. First of all, businesses cannot just arbitrarily increase prices. They're constrained by competition and demand. If they could do that, they would have already done so in order to maximize profit, but they can't do that. And increasing the minimum wage only increases the labor cost. It does not increase the output or the productivity, and it leads to fewer jobs and higher prices. Next, he said, in conjunction with the tax reform, rent freezes, etc., making the city more affordable to live increases its population. Rent control and rent freezes leads to housing shortages because when you artificially cap the price of rent, it leads developers to build fewer homes. Developers will look at that and say, well, if I build new apartment units here or new housing here, then I'm going to be subjected to these rent control laws and rent freezes, right? So I'd rather not build new housing units in this area, take my money somewhere else and build it in a different city or a different state, which then leads to a shortage of supply of housing. And when you have an increase in population, but not an increase in the supply of housing, and then yet you cannot increase the price to reflect the demand, it leads to people being homeless, and it also leads to a secondary market where people who ends up getting or who are lucky enough to get those rent control units are gonna sublease those units back out to the market at an exponentially higher price. So even if your apartment is not rent control, you're gonna see an increase in price because there's only so much housing available. That additional tax revenue, he's talking about the increase in population, can be used to fund policies like government-owned grocery stores, which can then compete with fast food chains, which comprises of majority of minimum wage workers. Anything the government own and operate is ever efficient because they lack profit motives, price signals, and market feedback, which are necessary to guide efficient use of resources. If you ever go to the DMV, right, what do you notice, right? It's very inefficient, it's very slow because they have no incentives to improve. I mean, if you go there and you don't like the service, where else are you going to go? Nowhere else. It is well documented that most large corporations price gouge regardless of minimum wage, so creating a situation where their main customer base can access healthy foods at low cost forces them to lower their prices to keep their base. This whole idea of price gouging is so misunderstood. A business cannot price gouge in a competitive free market. If a business is price gouging and charging a lot more, you can always go to its competitors and pay less. Competitors will see that opportunity to charge less and win your business. So competition naturally constrains the business's ability to price gouge. The only way that a business can actually price gouge is through government regulations where that business is the only one that is allowed to sell that product or service, usually things like patents. Another thing that people also confuse price gouging is when there is a natural disaster and the prices reflects the demand, because when there's a natural disaster, people buy more, so the demand increases and the prices have to reflect the demand, because if it doesn't, then it leads to shortages. So people think that it's price gouging, but it's really not. It's just a simple supply and demand. Crazy to me is that you understand the concept that if the government were to provide foods at a low cost, it forces them to lower their prices. But somehow you don't seem to understand that competition can also lower its prices as well. Then he said, however, with more people living in the city, they will still manage a profit regardless of increased foot traffic. Economic growth and prosperity comes from productivity increase, not population increase. If you have an increase in population without the increase of job creation or capital formation, all it's going to do is strain the infrastructure and then raise the living cost.